Welcome to Lesson 4 on Weathering and Erosion. The goal in this lesson is to be able to use evidence to show how weathering and erosion change Earth's surface. Our science vocabulary this lesson is weathering and erosion. And so we're going to pause to take some notes. Weathering, I want you to draw a little arrow up here. I'm going to tell you what weathering is. Weathering is when something like a rock breaks down. Weathering is breaking down. Okay? And then for erosion, I want you to draw an arrow going down and off to the side and down. So like this. Erosion is moving away. Okay? So that's the difference. When parts of Earth's surface are weathered, they are broken down. And the things that break down, the things that cause the breakdown of Earth's surface, such as rocks and minerals, the things that cause the weathering, we're going to put this little code here now as a mnemonic, okay? W-W-I-T. W-W-I-T space P. W-W-I-T. Weathering is the breaking down of rock or something over time due to W-W-I-T. W-W-I-T space P. And in that space, I'm going to insert a little letter C next to the T. And that stands, WWITP stands for, or WITP stands for wind, water, ice, temperature change in plants. So these are the sources of weathering. And then moving away, erosion is when little particles are moved away from wherever they broke down at. And that is WWIG. W-W-I-G. WWIG. And erosion, little particles of rock are moved away by wind, water, ice, and gravity. So before we move on, let's practice the definitions of weathering. Weathering, I want you to put your hands together like a rock, okay? Like a rock. Make a nice fist. There we go. Weathering is breaking down. So now break your hands apart. Let's say it together. Weathering, let's start with our rock. Hold on. So before we move on, let's practice those definitions of weathering and erosion, okay? Weathering, I'm going to put my fist together like a rock. Weathering is breaking down. And so see how I'm breaking my hands apart? I'm not going to move my hands apart. I'm just going to break them apart. So get ready. Let's put our fists together. Weathering, make sure you hold your hands still, is breaking down. Erosion is moving away. Put your hands together. Weathering, erosion. Weathering, erosion. Weathering is breaking down. Erosion is moving away. Put the date on the next section. Chemical weathering. Okay, well, weathering, use your hands. What's weathering? Start with that rock fist. Weathering is breaking down. So chemical weathering means chemical breaking down. Let's read now. Ocean waves, rushing rivers, pouring rain, and blustering winds can change rocks. Weathering is the process that wears away or breaks down rock. The two basic types of weathering are chemical and physical. Chemical weathering can happen when rain mixes with chemicals in the air and interacts with the rock. Chemical weathering can also happen when plants rot and produce chemicals. Those chemicals can interact with rock. In both examples, the surface of the rock can become rough or pitted. Deep pits or holes in rock are evidence that chemical weathering has taken place. Evidence is observable information that you can use to answer questions. Chemical weathering causes rock materials to turn into new kinds of materials. Wow, that was really fascinating. So let's go back and read this. So chemical weathering. Weathering, okay, start with that rock fist. Weathering is breaking down. So I'm reading about how chemicals can cause rocks to break down. So the first thing I'm going to do is underline weathering and write in that key definition, that key clue of breaking down. Weathering is the process that wears away or breaks down rock. So I'm going to underline with my regular pencil. Weathering is the process that breaks down rock. Now I'm going to grab one of my highlighter pencils. The two basic types of weathering are chemical and physical. The two basic types of weathering are chemical and physical. So I'm about to read about chemical weathering, which means I also expect later to read about physical weathering. Chemical weathering can happen when rain mixes with chemicals in the air and interacts with the rock. I'm going to highlight that. Let's see, chemical weathering. I'm going to highlight the words chemical weathering. Not too hard. You want to be able to read what it says. Chemical weathering can happen when rain mixes with chemicals in the air and interacts with the rock. Chemical weathering can also happen when plants rot and produce chemicals. So let's see, my red highlighting says, chemical weathering can happen when rain mixes with chemicals in the air and interacts with the rock. Weathering can also happen, I want to include the word also. Okay. So next I'm going to highlight chemical weathering can happen when, but then I'm going to underline rain mixes with chemicals in the air and interacts with the rock. Going to highlight the word also. Also, when plants rot and produce chemicals. I'm going to underline when plants rot and produce chemicals. That way, when I read it back, it says chemical weathering can happen when rain mixes with chemicals in the air and interacts with the rock. Also, when plants rot and produce chemicals. So that tells me two sources of chemicals that get on rocks and cause weathering. They cause the rocks to break down. In both examples, the surface of the rock can become rough or pitted. So whether you have chemical weathering from chemicals in the rain or chemicals from plants, deep pits or holes can be formed. It makes the rocks, it makes it rough. Deep pits or holes in rock are evidence. I'm going to box this sentence. Deep pits or holes in rock are evidence that chemical weathering has taken place. I'm going to highlight the word chemical weathering. And then chemical weathering causes rock materials to turn into new kinds of materials. I'm going to box that sentence as well. Chemical weathering causes rock materials to turn into new kinds of materials. Then I'm going to highlight chemical weathering, new kinds of materials, because that's important. There's a chemical change taking place there. So my final annotations look like so. I underlined weathering. I wrote down what it meant. I underlined the definition of weathering. Weathering is the process that breaks down rock. The two basic types of weathering are chemical and physical. Then I highlighted more details about chemical weathering only. Chemical weathering can happen when rain mixes with chemicals in the air and interacts with the rock. Also when plants rot and produce chemicals. Deep pits or holes in rock are evidence that chemical weathering has taken place. Chemical weathering causes rock to turn into new kinds of materials.